This is the tutorial to sew the Saltdean dress. If you don't already have the pattern, the link is in the description. I'm going to start showing you which bits I've interfaced. So I've interfaced, as you can see, both of the neck facings, the front and the back, and I've also marked the centre front and the centre back by clipping. Now these little strips, I've just cut them about 1 centimetre wide and just over the length of the pocket notches. You can see the notches there, and I'm just going to place it 5mm or 1/8 of an inch from the raw edge, and then I'm going to press those on just to strengthen the pocket a little bit, the pocket opening, as this is a very light linen. There we go, so that's where I'm going to place them. Do that on the front and the back. There we go, I've pressed them on just a little bit away from the edge. So now we're going to attach the yoke to our sort of dress main bodice part. You can see this is wrong side down because I've got the interfacing there. So right side up, and then the yoke needs to be right side down. You can see I've matched these notches. I just put a little nick in where the centre fronts or the centre backs are on each panel, and you can see I've got a double notch here that shows you that that's both my back pieces for my dress. Pin this along the top, and we're going to stitch 1 centimetre from the raw edge. There we go, little back tack to start, and we're just going to whiz across this seam. Nice straight seam, easy sew, back tack to finish. There we are, that's our seam. Slightly hairy, so we're going to press it downwards with the iron, and also I'm going to zigzag or overlock the edge to neaten it as it's a bit hairy. There we go, you can see it's lovely and neat on the right side, and that's the wrong side. You can see it's pressed down and overlocked right along the edge. So once you've finished that process again for the front of your dress, we're going to stitch the pockets on. So again, you should have little notches here where the pockets are. You can see you interfacing on the other side. So this is the right side of your dress, and you want right sides together. Pin that pocket. You can see I've already neatened the edges with an overlock, and pin to the other side. Make sure your pocket's pointing downwards because obviously you want to be able to put your hands in rather than up. And we're just going to stitch 1 centimetre seam allowance again. Here we go. So repeat for all the 4 pocket sections on both sides of your dress. So there you can see I've just stitched it along, and it's through that interfacing just to give it a little bit more strength, as it's a very light linen, this one. I'm going to edge stitch my pocket now, so I'm edge stitching the seam allowance to my pocket bag to hold it all nicely in. Gives it a little bit more strength and a little bit more body as well. So I do that for all 4 pocket sections, and then I'm going to give it a little overlock or zigzag down that side seam. You could always do that before you do your edge stitching if you find it easier. There we go, needs a press, but that's how you're doing your pockets. There you go, you can see I've overlocked it all the way down. Okay, so you can see I've overlocked all the remaining raw edges except for the neckline, just to neaten them off before I stitch my fronts and backs together. You'll want to make sure that you can still see your vent notch if you've chosen to do a version with a vent. I'm going to place these together now. Starting by joining it at the neck, pinning across towards the hem. There we go, towards the cuff even. And then I'm putting my sides together, match those vent notches. There you go, you can still see mine through that overlocking. So I'm going to pop a pin in there so that I know that's where I need to stop stitching. Pin around my pockets. Matching the edges nicely. And then up to under the arm. It's quite a tight corner, that one. Matching those seam lines towards the cuff. So I'm going to stitch my centimetre seam allowance starting from the neckline on my shoulder, back tack, nice straight seam. You can whiz all the way down to the cuff where you back tack and cut off. Then start from my cuff again. There we go, nice back tack. Again, a nice straight line down to the underarm, which is that tight curve, so you may wish to pivot your fabric around the needle down towards my pocket, and I'm going to come just to the left of that stitching that I've used to hold the pocket bag on and whiz round my pocket. And again, when I get to the bottom, I'm going to come just this side of the stitching so that none of that stitching shows. You can't see the join in the pocket bag when you've turned it through. Stitching down to my vent notch, back tack and come off. So do that for the other side as well. That you can see here where I've stitched. And I'll show you close up where I've come. You can just see it's just like a millimetre or two the other side of that stitch line, and the same on the bottom, so that I know that join won't show when it's turned through. This is my vent. I'm just going to press this open now. Here we go. Nicely pressed. Shoulder seam, underarm seam. You can see, look, the stitching is inside the pocket, so it's a nice invisible pocket. Beautiful. Both sides. Oh, a little bit of fluff there. And there's the vent. I've pressed that open all the way down because I will stitch that up before I do the hem. So now we're going to do the neck facings. Just a reminder, I've interfaced these. It's a very light interfacing because it's a very, very light linen. You can see the front one there because it's lower than the back. And I've also popped little notches in the front and the back at the centre so that I know when I'm lining it up with the bodice. So I'm going to stitch these, my centimetre seam allowance, at the shoulder seams. Nice bit of back tacking there, so you can see they're joined at the shoulders. I'm going to press that open, that seam allowance, both sides, and I'm going to overlock the outside edge. There we go, so that's pressed. I've overlocked the outside edge and I've got those little notches for the centre front, centre back. Great. So now it's time to attach this facing. Again, I've marked the centre marks, the fronts and the backs on my facing and my neckline, and I know that's the front because it's a little bit lower. I'm going to start by matching up these seams at the shoulder and pop a pin in each side. And then I'm going to match the notches and pin those, so centre front first, centre back, and then I'll pop a pin in between the shoulders and the centres before I start stitching. Okay, centimetre as usual. Here we go. There we are, just easing anything that might have stretched a little bit. You can always put a stay stitch in if you're worried about your neckline. Stitching around the corners. They're again a little bit snug around the shoulders. It's quite a tight curve, so just take your time. You can always tack it first if you'd rather. There we go. Take the pins out and we're going to clip and braid now. So I'm gonna clip about every 1.5 centimetres, something like that. A bit closer together when it gets to the shoulder seams because it's quite a tight curve and you'll need a little bit more manoeuvrability. So I'm trimming down those seams a little bit, popping in those extra clips, and keep going around the rest of the neckline. Then I'm going to grade the facing. So this is the interfaced facing layer. Just trim it down the seam allowance to about half. Do all of yours. I'm just going to show you that little bit for the minute, and then you're going to push that seam allowance up towards the facing and do some edge stitching right on the edge there of your facing. There we are, we're under the machine. So that seam allowance is all pulled to the right towards my, there you are, you can see it under there, under my facing. So I'm stitching effectively that seam allowance to the facing, just right on the edge. There we are, that's what it looks like when it's finished. And you can tuck it all in. There we go, tuck it through. And just before I'm going to press it, I'm going to sink stitch my shoulder seams. So I'm going to stitch all the way through the facing and the dress at the shoulder seam, try and get it in that ditch so that it doesn't show too much, just to hold the facing down a little bit. There you go, I've pressed it now as well, so it looks nice and crisp. So now you can see, look, there you go, that's my sink stitching right in that seam. You can see it a bit better on this one because I just came off the edge a little bit there. All the way through the facing and the dress, just to hold it down. There we go. Okay, so now it's time for the hems. I'm going to turn mine up 4 centimetres, that's the seam allowance I've allowed for. So check it with my tape measure. 4 centimetres, give it a quick pin. It's the same 4 centimetres for the cuffs and for the hem. It's a nice deep hem to help the garment hang nicely, especially when it's in a lighter fabric like this. Gives it a little bit of extra weight. You can see the vent there. I will stitch up and around that first. But I'm going to pin up my 4 centimetres as a guide. You could always press it as well before you start stitching. I often do that. I don't pin it, I will literally just press it on the ironing board up to the right amount, and then it's all sort of ready, prepared for you. So I will stitch that vent first, show you that, and then I'll be stitching all my hems and my cuffs. So this is the vent, literally just going to whiz up one side, pivot to stitch across the opening. There's the pivot. You could go backwards and forwards, do a little back tack across here if you wanted to strengthen it a bit more. And then stitch down the other side. That's the vent, and then it's just stitching up that 4 centimetres. I'm stitching it right through my overlooking, so I get the deepest hem possible. Looks nicer from the other side, I think, if it's quite a deep hem. Stitching the cuffs the same way, all the way around. And do that on both sides. We're nearly there. Okay, so this is what it looks like when it's come off the machine. Needs a nice press really, but you can see I've stitched through the overlocking, and the same for the hem. Trim off the little stragglers, give it a press. Oh, here we go, this looks nice now. You can see it's lovely and crisp. Let's have a look at those vents. That looks nice. Nice crisp deep hem. There's another vent there. It's looking lovely. Okay, so all that's left to do is the tie, which is an optional thing. You don't have to do a tie, you can wear it with or without. Same with the pockets and the vents, you don't have to do any of that. So I've cut my piece and I'm going to stitch 1 centimetre from the edges, and I'm going to leave about a 5 centimetre gap somewhere in the middle of it. It doesn't have to be exactly in the middle, but just to turn it through. Here we go, and I'm going to pivot for the corner and just zhuzh all the way down. Remember to stop, back tack, come off and start again to leave that 5 centimetre or so gap, and off we go again, right the way to the end. There we are, there's my gap. I'm going to trim off the corners. I'm not going to trim down my seam allowance because this fabric is so light. I mean, I even contemplated putting some interfacing on it because it's so light, but actually I've decided I'm going to top stitch it instead. Here we go, I'm going to pull this through, and this takes a little while, so we may speed this up. Poke it all through. There we go, just going to use a pin to pull out the little cornery bits very carefully so that I don't pull the seam too hard, and I'm going to roll the seams down the length of it and give it a press in a minute. Just get those corners out first. Where's the other end? Oh, I'll turn this bit through as well. Okay, let's pull these bits through. There we go. So roll those seams so that it's all turned through nicely. Give it a quick press. Oh, there we go, it looks better already. So I'm still going to go with my top stitching because this is such a super light fabric. Let's whiz through this as quickly as possible. I've just matched up the side of the foot with the side of the fabric there, and then I'm going to move it over and just do a stitch line on the edge, and I'm going to whiz round that too. I never worry too much about it being a bit wiggly on a belt because nobody sees it. It's tied up, isn't it, round your waist. So there we go, that's it. I'm so pleased I decided to do that stitching because that has given it just a little bit more body. So when I tie it round, it will hold its shape a bit more without ruining the flow of the fabric. There we go, so that's one dress with a belt and pockets and vents. Enjoy!